I love me some retro gaming, but I'd be lying to you if I said it was all sunshine and daisies. For every incredible game experience, there are 5 bad ones, and wading through that mess can be a depressing endeavor. That prompted me to go back and pick some real stinkers that you should avoid at all costs. I played this batch of terrible games so you don't have to. Let's go ahead and get this one over with. The original arcade version of Double Dragon is fondly remembered by many of us. It was one of the earliest beat-em-ups that really captured the heart of the genre, and thanks to its multiplayer option, you could bring a friend along for the ride. Funnily enough, 1991's Double Dragon 2 The Revenge was actually released before the first game on the Genesis, and it stayed in Japan, never seeing localization in any other region. I was really excited to finally play this one because it was supposed to be more arcade accurate than the NES port that landed a few years before. But let's not candy coat this shit show. This is an awful game that plays terrible, looks rough, and really fails to deliver even a mildly entertaining port of the arcade original. Once again, these two guys start out hiding in the garage while their lady friend is all alone in the street, but this time she isn't simply kidnapped, but rather gunned down viciously. From there, it's just a roller coaster ride of slowdown, poor hit detection, dark graphics, and an experience that pales next to even the 8-bit version. Only the music has any real value here, and even it takes a hit thanks to the piss-poor sound effects. A company called Powellsoft was responsible for this disaster, something that came as a bit of a shock considering they also were the ones that brought us the quite decent Undead line. Even if you enjoyed the original arcade version, stay away from this one. Equally bad versions of Double Dragon 3 and 5 are on the Genesis as well. In 1991, Shadow of the Beast was an enigma to me back in the day. Its exploratory design and trial and error gameplay really threw me for a loop, and I quit playing it after a few hours of frustration and confusion. When Shadow of the Beast 2 came along the following year, I actually wanted to play it after seeing some of the positive reviews. I kept seeing the word improved applied to pretty much everything, so when I finally sat down to play it, I was really looking forward to it. Unfortunately for me, this was still a full-on mystery of a game. Once again, you are dropped into it with no idea where to go or what to do. I go right and the natives attack me at every turn. I get past those guys and I'm bombarded by other shit I can't even see off the screen. So then I try to go the other way, where I am again attacked and come to a dead end. I find an item though, so I go back to the tribesmen and offer it up as a bribe. They didn't take kindly to that, so once again I'm attacked. Like the first, this kind of trial and error simply does not appeal to me in this type of game, particularly where a death sends you right back to the title screen to start all over again. It's so easy to get lost, get stuck, or simply have no idea what to do next. It's almost mandatory to use a walkthrough to get any enjoyment out of this, unless this type of challenge appeals to you. It's also available on the Sega CD with a bunch of additions like cinemas that bring it closer to the Amiga original. Our first game came as an absolute shock in December of 1993. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters was a Konami-developed one-on-one fighter that played like trash. Cheap AI, a weak moves list, unappealing fighters, and a crap combo system really made this one look terrible next to its Super Nintendo counterpart. This was a shame because the sound and visuals were set to be something special. The presentation must have been the primary focus of development because they certainly spent very little time on how it played. The flow is awful, with most of the moves knocking you down, cutting out any chance for meaningful combos or back and forth battles with lots of intensity.
It uses just 2 buttons for combat, stripping down the action to a bare minimum that makes most fighters look complicated by comparison. What you are left with is a game that is fondly remembered by few and left a generation of Genesis and Mega Drive owners wondering why they got the short end of the stick. Sonic Team, for a time, was one of Sega's premier internal studios. They produced most of the 16-bit Sonics, Nights into Dreams, and Burning Rangers. They underwent a number of internal name and member changes over the years, but I still can't believe how bad Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis was on the GBA in 2006. This 15th anniversary reissue was a travesty. Gameplay physics are different, which affects everything from how you jump to how fast you speed up and how quickly you slow down. Sound and music is point blank a joke. The performance was nothing short of shocking, given how much more powerful the hardware was. Sonic Team would have been known internally as Global Entertainment R&D Department 1 in 2006, and I'm not entirely sure if they are responsible for this release. The in-game credits only list the original 1991 development team, and the manual is full of marketing people. It doesn't really matter. Whoever the hell is responsible for this mess did a terrible thing here. This is the kind of shenanigans that gave the series a bad name. The kind of release that hurt Sega's standing with its fans. The little blue blur deserved better. For a stretch of time, Technosoft could do no wrong. On the Genesis, they lavished its fans with the Thunder Force shooters. The mighty Herzog Zwei was a real-time strategy masterpiece, and Elemental Master was a vertically scrolling classic. But when they hit the Saturn, there were some speed bumps, and none of those were as nasty as 1996's Steeldom. This is supposed to be a 3D arena fighter with robots, but good luck controlling this thing. The tank mechanics do not pair well with a fighter at all, and the learning curve is steep. Its claim to fame was its use of the Tizen link cable for multiplayer, but this was a cumbersome feature that isn't worth the additional cost. It's also an incredibly ugly game that doesn't do the Saturn hardware any real justice. While other arena-based combat games like Virtual On looked incredible, this looked like something you would have received on a Jaguar or 3DO. The control can be tamed with some practice, but it's never anything more than an average game from a company that usually delivered god-tier experiences. In 1992, Sega published Tailspin, based on the Disney cartoon of the same name. It was developed by Interactive Designs, who was also responsible for Green Dog and Eternal Champions on the Genesis. You often hear me criticize Fantasia, but this one here is just as bad. I hadn't played this one in a while, so I was hoping some more time with it might change my mind. Absolutely not. This still plays as poorly as ever. It falters in just about every way. The hit detection is poor, the stage design is terrible, and you often are confused as to what exactly you need to do or where to go. There are some shooting stages mixed in there as well, but they don't help matters any, as you are often pelted with enemies constantly. The entire point of the game is to collect crates, so you can open up the exit. Gameplay beyond that is collecting more crates and stacking them to get to higher ground. The crap sound and music piles on, and by the second or third stage you really begin to hate this. Even if you love the original show, I still can't recommend it.
I wanted to like it, especially since it has two-player co-op, but the design is so poor, it destroys any of the appeal. It's another game Sega of America was ultimately responsible for, and like so many others, left the Genesis worse off because of it. Sega had a really great run with the Disney license on the Genesis. We got killer classics like Castle of Illusion and Quackshot early on, setting the stage for many more to follow. Not all was great in the Magical Kingdom, however. In 1992, Sega published the Blue Sky Software developed Ariel the Little Mermaid. Now the thing is that Blue Sky Software had been responsible for Jurassic Park and Vector Man, so in hindsight you may think this was a good thing. Not so fast, because they really dropped the ball with this glorified maze game. While you can play as either Ariel or her father, the underwater gameplay is just awful. It's slow and choppy, and I mean to the point where you feel like the entire game engine is broken and under the threat of complete shutdown the entire time. The stage design keeps you looping around massive areas that all look the same, and the powers at your disposal are inaccurate and absolutely no fun to use. When Sega kept the Disney projects internal, they were great, but the quality tended to go straight to hell when someone else got a hold of them. One of the worst games Sega ever had their name associated with on the Genesis. Even though I am a Sega fan, sometimes I play something I immediately know I'm not gonna like very much. When I first played Sonic Spinball, I knew 20 seconds in, that game wasn't for me. When I got my hands on Tails Sky Patrol for the Game Gear, I didn't need half that time to know this was a game I should have turned off and never touched again. Starring Sonic's best bud and sidekick Tails, you use your two asses to fly through 5 stages of pure unadulterated hell. This is one of the most frustrating one-hit wonders I've ever played. Touch anything, you're dead, again and again. I have never died so many times in a video game in my life, and playing it here again, I was quickly reminded just how atrocious it plays. It's absolutely unforgiving, and just how small kids were supposed to enjoy this is beyond me. I mean, you can die and have to continue on the training stage for God's sakes. No doubt the developers at Sims knew they had a really short game, so they overcompensated by making it painfully difficult. Sega must have known it had a dud on its hands because they only released it in Japan. The release of the Sega CD was one of the most exciting times in gaming for me. I had all sorts of visions of sprite scaling powerhouse releases, so when Joe Montana NFL football was announced for it, I was ready day freaking one to own it. It was to use scaling and rotation of the machine for a pseudo 3D engine that would put Madden and other 16-bit games to shame. It was handled by Malibu Interactive that did Batman Returns for the Sega CD, so I knew they had the talent to take advantage of the hardware. As it turns out, it's shame on me for believing Sega of America had any quality control over the project to make sure it was a winner. What we ended up with was a choppy, ugly mess of a game that played as bad as it looked. I mean, soak up what you were looking at there. It's the kind of visuals that you can just look at and know it plays badly. The entire thing is a pixelated mess. The running game is broken, the passing game is a Hail Mary every time, and I swear the players run different routes than what you choose. It even lacks basic indicators for things like interceptions. Sometimes it just happens, and you have no clue what just transpired. Sega was trying to sell customers on a $300 upgrade for their Sega Genesis, and yet this was orders of magnitude inferior to what they could already play on their base console. Sega had a reputation as a sports leader at the time, and this really hurt their standing in the North American market after the awful reviews came in. Add in the fact that other Sega sports franchises were completely MIA on the device, and you really had to wonder just what the hell Sega was doing. It would be 9 years before another Golden Axe hit the market. In 2003, the Sega Ages 2500 line of games got Golden Axe, which was a remake of the very first arcade game with a new polygonal engine. And this shit show is one of Sega's all-time worst games. Holy hell. Right from the moment it begins, everything is a bad joke of poor animation, garish colors, terrible models, and gameplay that is slow, clunky, and not fun in the slightest. The only redeeming element of this garbage is the upbeat and emotional soundtrack. You'll be too busy hating everything else to care, however. Not even the magic saves it from being something you'll want to turn off after a couple of minutes. The idea of a 2.5D Golden Axe should have been a winner, but the execution in this travesty does this series no justice at all. I understand the Sega Ages 2500 series was supposed to be a value line, but this pathetic entry should have stayed unreleased. It was developed by Sims, who had been responsible for a number of quality titles in the past, but my lord did they cut loose a massive, explosive shitting of the bed with this turd. Another discovery of mine thanks to the early days of the internet was the Japanese Famicom exclusive Transformers Mystery of Convoy. To put my expectations into focus here, I was a major Transformers fan as a kid. I didn't get many of the toys, but what I had, I cherished, and the thought of a video game based on that was truly tantalizing. Well, that is before I actually played it. This was published by Takara in 1986, and is easily one of the most disappointing finds I've ever had. Good lord, what were the developers thinking? Right from jump, this is broken at every level. The visuals suck, the weapons you have are utterly useless, you can only take a single hit, and enemies spawn one after the other incessantly. It even has enemies you can't destroy. I mean, when you knock the planes out of the sky, your standard weapon shoots over the head of the resulting enemies. That's right, you have to transform to hit half the enemies in the game. And you would have thought they would have designed a game around using multiple Transformers, right? Not so, as the vast majority of the game is centered on Ultra Magnus. I can't stomach this for more than a few minutes, and have never seen anything past the first few stages. This is the worst example of a license cash-in I've ever seen, and a disgrace to the Transformers name. To put into perspective how bad this game is, and the profoundly negative experience I had with it, there was another Transformers game released a year later on the Famicom Disk System called The Headmasters, and 20 plus years later, I still haven't played it. In 1991, I found RoboCop 2 on the NES and was ready for a run-and-gun ass-kicking sci-fi adventure. What I got instead was a game that played like you were slipping around on ice constantly and loaded with enemies that were far more capable than you at getting the job done. RoboCop also looked extremely silly in this game, kinda like Hank Hill's dad Cotton in the old King of the Hill animated show. I mean, where are the rest of his legs at? You look silly, and it's difficult to take the game seriously when the visual representation of the hero is so compromised. But as usual, it's the gameplay that's the biggest issue here. That previously mentioned ice feels like it's on every surface. RoboCop will move an additional inch or so whenever you stop or try and jump, leading to falling into pits or taking damage at the worst of times. Nothing feels exact or accurate when you move around, and this feeling never lets up and never resolves itself with additional playtime. And there are many platforming segments throughout the stages, so expect death to come at the worst of times, and it's often not your fault. I also felt the level design was ludicrous for a RoboCop title. I mean, this is old Detroit, but you are jumping around mostly abstract warehouses that look like something out of a Futurama episode. Nothing fits. The sprite is wrong, the stages are wrong, the gameplay is wrong. I wasn't expecting anything to rival Contra or anything, but I was hoping for more than this. With the Genesis lacking a Robocop to call its own at the time, I only had this as an alternative. I just wish I had known then what I know now. When I was a youngster, I adored Swamp Thing, both the comic and the campy Wes Craven movie starring Adrienne Barbeau. So in 1992, I was eager to give the NES game a go. What we have here is easily one of the dullest, most unexciting titles you could ever play. Swamp Thing is let loose in drab environments and gets to punch ho-hum enemies like robot animals. But the joke's on you because your punch is so completely ineffective that it's best just to run from everything. And that's exactly what this game is all about. Here we have one of DC's most powerful and unique characters, and all you do is run away 95% of the time. There is also inexplicable things happening, like tin cans falling from the sky that can actually kill you. I honestly don't know what else to say about this dud. It misses the mark so far with this IP, you have to wonder if the developers at Imagineering actually knew anything about the source material at all. Had they even seen the comic book featuring this character? I've wanted a video game covering Swamp Thing for years because so far, no studio has even come close to doing him any justice at all. In 1992, I was privy to one of the worst games ever released on the Genesis, Renovation and Telnet Japan's Beast Wrestler. This isometric atrocity is a wrestling game in name only. It's rarely little more than a bear hug and choking simulator that controls terribly. I never feel like my on-screen counterpart is doing what I'm telling them, and getting knocked down results in being stunned for much longer than it should be. It seems the developers focused all their skill and time on making the monsters look good, and very little on making them control and play well. I wanna like it, heck I wanna love it to be honest, but there is little here to deserve your time. Lord knows I still didn't trust gaming reviews even then, but this one was universally panned and I should have listened. If you want to have some fun with some giant creatures, fire up King of the Monsters. It plays so much better. Video games were no stranger to weird licenses that made no sense at all. In August of 1993, the Genesis got Wayne's World, a platform-heavy run-and-gun based on the Saturday Night Live skit and movie starring Mike Myers and Dana Carvey. Being just 18 at the time, I of course loved the source material and figured the game deserved a look. Good night was I wrong. Right from the opening, you are treated with some heinously ugly storyboards trying to give you the feel of their public access show. This leads straight into jumping around terribly designed stages and constantly being bombarded with ear-grating voice samples and sound effects. They repeat over and over to the point of nausea. THQ knew it was so bad they only bothered releasing it in the United States. I actually set out to capture this one long enough to show you a few different levels, but I just couldn't take more than a few minutes of it before I had to cut it off. Rarely has a game so completely overwhelmed me so quickly to give up on it. An effect that is still as potent today as it was 27 years ago. Sega was still developing Genesis titles well into the life of the Saturn, and Experts was one of those releases in June of 1996. It was meant to be a spin-off of Eternal Champions, but you wouldn't know it outside of being told that today. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up with adventure and strategy elements. You have full control over a 3-person counter-terrorist team and can switch between them at any point. You must infiltrate the base, use each one's skills and weapons to navigate various obstacles and enemies, and save the day. The back of the box makes it all sound so cool, even trumping up claims you can have different effects on the game world depending on your decisions. Problem is, the game plays like complete dog shit and you'll see precious little of these interesting bits because you'll be fumbling around with the atrocious gameplay. I don't really need to say much more in detail. I mean, just look at the screen and you can tell it doesn't play well. Making things worse is the fact that the entire base you have to explore all looks the same, so it's really easy to get lost and you have to face the bad guys again and again, trapped in a rotation of tedium that quickly destroys your will to play it. I admire the attempt at huge pre-rendered characters, but man did Sega miss the mark here by a mile.
Secondary mission active.
Double Dragon has a long and storied history of being really decent 8-bit home titles, but man did things go south when the series made its way to the Genesis. Every one of them sucked, but Double Dragon 3 here takes the crown of King of Sucking. It was released in 1993 by Flying Edge, or what was basically Acclaim. This was a port of the arcade original with a bunch of stuff missing or just outright broken. The most egregious of these is the truly punishing gameplay. There are so many things wrong with it, it's difficult to pick a starting point. The hitboxes are all wrong, there's no stun animation for the bad guys, the damage inflicted on you is unreal, and every enemy attack reaches further and is more potent than your own. Weapons are utterly useless, the shop system provides no help at all, and the only time you can actually do any damage is when your invincible frames are flashing after you've gotten knocked down. That means in order to actually kill anything, you have to take damage yourself. I had disliked Double Dragon 1 and 2 on the Genesis for various reasons, but good God is this one so much worse. It really is a shame too because they got the sound and graphics quite respectable. On a platform of beat-em-ups as strong as the Streets of Rage series, this kind of second-rate, unsatisfying, and abysmal effort simply had no place. This was Acclaim trying to capitalize on Sega's success in the West by flooding the market with so much garbage, they figured they'd sell some of it just because it existed. It's no wonder they're no longer around. The story behind the release of Slaughter Sport is more interesting than the game itself. It was developed at a time when Activision was going through significant financial troubles and restructuring, which meant a US release was initially cancelled. It was finally picked up again by Razorsoft, who brought it over a year after the Japanese version. That dedication to see it released would make you think it was totally worth your time, but you'd be dead wrong. This complete shitfest of a one-on-one fighter is one of the most broken, infuriating, and unplayable messes I've ever had the displeasure of wasting time with. You are trapped in Mondu's Fight Palace and must do battle to the death, and death is what you'll receive plenty of. Nothing here works at all. The one-on-one battles actually allow you to have your back to an opponent and you need to turn around to face them. Get knocked down, you get up with your back to them. Awesome. Attacks have no rhyme or reason as far as what lands and what doesn't. Your opponents can actually walk through so many of your moves that it seems like the engine itself is just straight up broken. Fights quickly devolve into just mashing buttons in a frantic effort to try and do some kind of damage, but the AI is much better than you at actually scoring hits. People talk often about bad fighting games. You don't know what a truly bad fighting game is until you play this steaming heap of garbage. Of all the games we have looked at in this episode, Dark Castle holds a special place in my heart of absolute hatred. Few times have I played a game this bad. The visuals are poor, the sound is irritating beyond belief, and the gameplay truly stands apart as its own special layer in hell. Released in 1991, this is sort of a platformer mixed with adventure elements. You must find your way through various stages that consist mainly of jumping to platforms and climbing ropes while enemies try and stop you. The gameplay is a complete hindrance here, however. Just throwing rocks to defend yourself is a chore, and there are actually areas in the floor you can trip on and fall. That's correct. Trip and fall in a platformer. Enemies are way faster than you can't fall more than a few inches without dying, and the hit detection is way outside your sprite. But the developers weren't content with just making the game difficult and unfun to play, they also had to add what are some of the most annoying and rage-inducing sound effects I've ever heard in a video game. While you are on that 556th death, nothing beats enemies taunting you with ear-piercing voiceovers. EA was responsible for releasing this, another early game of dubious quality they picked up from the computer market. Had Electronic Arts stayed on this path, they would have ended up like Acclaim and THQ, almost certainly. Finding a Genesis title worse than this one is no easy task.
In 1993, fighting games were showing up left and right, riding the coattails of Street Fighter II's meteoric success. I admit I was mesmerized by the genre and got duped by a number of games claiming to be the next best thing. Among those was Street Combat, an NCS and IROM joint that was a reskin of a Japanese Ranma title. But no matter what name this trash goes by, it's one of the worst fighters of its day. There's no real combo system here to speak of, the special moves are damn near useless, and the visuals are Master System level simplicity. Nearly everything knocks you down, and there are moves here you can just spam repeatedly to gain an easy victory. You gotta love the AI here too. It's the kind of thing where it's either a sitting duck or overly aggressive. There is no in between. I understand this was back in the day when fighting games were trying to compete with a vastly superior competitor, but surely the developers could have done better than this. I mean, just for frame of reference, this makes early fighters like Street Smart seem like the best thing ever. This one gets a special bit of hate from me because I actually spent good money on it, a time in my life when the price of a game was no joke. Sometimes you just gotta swallow your pride and admit you made a bad decision, but software like this was created to take advantage of children just looking to have a good time. If you think Shaq Fu was bad, I raise you Street Combat and challenge you to find me one that can best it.
No way.
I really enjoyed Super Mario World. It was a great looking, playing, and sounding adventure. It started off the life of the Super Nintendo in fine form, so when 1993's Mario is Missing showed up courtesy of the software Toolworks, I thought it would be a great gift for my two little sisters. But this is a case of assuming Nintendo's track record would mean another winner, even if it was an educational title. More wrong I couldn't have been, because even for an edutainment game, it's a piss-poor effort top to bottom. The gameplay is completely unintuitive. Even after having it explained to you, it kinda leaves you with a what the hell feeling to everything. Hidden behind the guise of a Mario adventure, Luigi goes looking for his brother across the globe. Essentially, you have to search across a handful of cities, talk to the people there, collect some items, answer a few questions, and that's pretty much it. You spend more time running around the drab environments than you do actually learning anything, and what little action there is comes and goes in a matter of seconds. I mean, the interaction here is a joke. You can only speak to the same few people throughout the levels, and the objectives never change. It's a roadmap to boredom, hidden behind an extremely popular IP. The droning music is a headache, Yoshi is there just to speed you up, and even its target audience grows tired of it after a few minutes. My younger sisters were done with it the same day they first played it, leaving just me to try it and get my money's worth. Nope, this turd went straight back to Babbage's, a lesson that not everything with Nintendo's name on it is pure gold. Although Chester Cheetah Too Cool to Fool was also released on the Genesis, it was here on the Super Nintendo that I first encountered it. Back in the early 90s, the mascot craze was in full swing and every publisher under the sun tried making their game the next big thing. You knew you were starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel when you started making games after mascots of salty snacks, yet many of these types of games were still pretty decent. Seems old Kaneko didn't get the memo on how these games worked, because this is one of the worst platformers you'll play on the Super Nintendo. It's slow, the sprites are too large making you an easy target, and the item powers are ridiculous. You can get a guitar where Chester jams out for 10 seconds just to kill 1 or 2 enemies around him. Get it on a water stage and you can actually jam your way right into damage. Then there's the sunglasses, which reveals hidden items by, you guessed it, dimming the hell out of the screen. I mean, come on, how did this seriously pass quality control testing? The visuals stink, the music sucks, and the stages become more and more tedious the deeper you get in. From the awkward mechanics of climbing vines to the actual stages that hides the enemies from you, this just descends into pure tedium after about 20 minutes or so. I never had high expectations for this one, but I did pick it up thinking it'd at least be something for the weekend. And if you last more than 2 or 3 stages, you're doing much better than I did. I was looking for something on the level of Bubsy. Instead I got this, a garishly bright boarfest that plays at a snail's pace. Save your money and go buy yourself another one of the dozen platformers for the Super Nintendo. Pretty much all of them are better.
Back in the day, Double Dragon was released for just about everything. If the console or computer had any real standing in the industry, it got a port of it. Even the handhelds of the time got their own games. But I have to confess I was still shocked someone attempted a port of it to the Atari 2600. I mean, the platform had been long dead when Double Dragon was released in the arcade in 1987. The NES and Master System had replaced it, and those were the versions you wanted to play. Even though I had heard of it for years, I still never took the time to sit down and play it. Until now, in this very video. Yep, this is the first time I have ever really sit down and played this one seriously, and it quickly became apparent why I had no desire to go after it before. This port of Double Dragon is awful in every way. I expected the sound and visual cutbacks. I mean, it's 1970s hardware after all, but that gameplay is just vinegar on an open and festering wound of an experience. Any attempt to actually fight is met with immediate destruction by the ridiculous AI. After being annihilated numerous times, I realized the only thing that you can do is just constantly elbow smash the computer to get anywhere. You could spam the elbow in other versions as well, but at least in those you could do other things to mix it up a little. You can argue all day about how this was impressive on a technical level because of the ancient hardware all you want. The end result is a poor playing experience that failed on every level to be the least bit fun. I'm no 2600 fan, so it might just be that kid in me that despised its mediocre arcade ports all those years ago, still talking. But this game is just as much fun as those old Tiger handhelds, and that ain't saying much.
I was a fan of the NES Castlevania the second I took control of the main character and heard that timeless soundtrack. Then the others came along and endeared me to the franchise even more. As the years went on, I discovered more Castlevania titles I had never played, and some I had never even heard of. When I sat down with Castlevania on the Amiga for the first time, I was expecting something akin to the NES game being ported to the Sega Genesis, but what I got was nothing of the kind. It was released in 1990 and developed by Novo Trade of Echo the Dolphin fame. It was a remake of the original Castlevania NES edition with an upgraded presentation. And I use upgraded loosely, however, because some things here come off notably worse. There's no question the color use has been amped up in places, but the questionable art changes go into effect right from the opening zombies. I mean, these 10-foot tall hopping monstrosities look so out of place. I was also quite displeased with the sound and music. While some Amiga games could sound great, this is light years behind the NES original and just sounds wrong across the board. Every time you catch a familiar melody and think it's going to get better, it veers off into some out-of-place change that destroys it entirely. But as iffy as the presentation was, it's nothing compared to how broken the gameplay is. Choppy, stuttering, near slideshow levels of movement and animation take this from the classic it's based on to a broken mess of unplayable garbage. Just navigating the main character left and right feels wrong, and every jump feels like you are about to careen straight into a pit death. Most of the boss encounters are little more than whipping as fast as you can to kill them, and there is no ending here whatsoever. I'd rather sit through any amount of Dark Castle, Castlevania 64, or ET gameplay challenges than have to play this shameful exhibition of tedious and insulting time wasting again. The developers and the publishers should have released their next game free of charge to make up for this travesty. The mere fact that they felt this was worth money is just plain highway robbery. Platform apologists will try and tell you that it has its merits, and I disagree 100%. It's a shit show of monumental proportions and should be stricken from history before it has a chance to disappoint any more fans of this classic IP.
Back to the Future 2 is point blank one of the worst games I've ever played. No hyperbole. This shit stain of a title plays terrible, sounds bad, and has very simple visuals. It was developed by Images Limited and published by Image Works in 1991. PAL Territories received it, and I feel nothing but pity on the poor souls that paid money to own or rent it. Death comes swift and often, and you'll spend more time looking at the title screen and cinematics than playing it. Absolute trash start to finish. In 1992, the PAL version of Back to the Future 3 was released, developed by Probe Software and published again by ImageWorks. Shockingly, this is not nearly as bad as Part 2. The visuals and sound are so much better, and while it doesn't play particularly well itself, it's light years ahead of Part 2. It mirrors much of the stage layout and gameplay found in the Genesis version, and I believe it's better here top to bottom. Not exactly good, but also not the disaster of the previous release. I had not played much of the 8-bit version of Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, and after 10 minutes, I really wish it had stayed that way. Released in 1994 by Acclaim, this is another joke on all of us. Pitiful gameplay just kills any chance this had at entertaining anyone. You are bombarded by the same few enemies every stage. Your arsenal includes a few different punches and kicks, but most are so useless, you'll just run around roundhousing everybody. It tries to be kung fu with bigger stages, but just ends up being another one that you can skip. How Acclaim lasted as long as they did crapping out ripoffs like this is beyond me. Again, it's a PAL exclusive. I was immediately filled with dread upon starting up Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It was done by Tiertex and US Gold in 1990, and it's so incredibly unappealing. It's slow, the jumping mechanics are funky, and the time limit destroys any desire to play it long term.
The visuals aren't bad, but there is no in-game music at all. After fighting with the pathetic control for 10 minutes, I was done. It's another shit game in this shitty roundup. Again, PAL regions were the only ones to get it. Oh man, here we go back to the awful third-party garbage. In 1993, Acclaim tried once again to rob you of your hard-earned money with RoboCop 3. You get the kind of design in this one that makes you want to stop playing it immediately. Constantly there are enemies shooting you off the screen before you even have a chance to respond. Who finds this kind of crap fun? How is it fair to trigger AI that can see you long before you see them? And it's something that never lets up the entire way. To get anywhere, you literally have to scroll the screen an inch at a time to see the bullets first. This is the kind of shit that makes dumpster fires enjoyable. Of all the sports games I was looking forward to on the Saturn, it was the NFL that I wanted the most. Alas, Sega was woefully unprepared to give us one in 1995. In fact, it wasn't until the very end of 1996 before NFL 97 showed up. And my god, what a disappointment it was. My hatred of this pile of shit is well documented in my videos. Sega, unable and unprepared to make a quality game of their own, had to license a half-made travesty from another developer, and had the gall to try and shove it on its poor Saturn fanbase. Awful graphics, gameplay that was years behind its Genesis Montana series, and just an all-around failure of a product. It supports 8 players at once, but why would you do that to 7 other people? Not having a decent NFL title ready in 1995 was bad, but dropping this poisonous and unplayable garbage on the market was damn near unforgivable. Every employee at Sega of America involved should be ashamed of themselves. Acclaim was back again in 2000 with yet another attempt to steal your money with Jeremy McGrath Supercross 2000. This dirt bike racer manages to defy the laws of physics and look like a PlayStation game all at the same time. There's no challenge at all. The bikes feel nothing like they should. The tricks are a joke, and despite being ugly as sin, the game manages to run poorly as well. Just hold the accelerator down, ride the walls, never fall off your bike, and win second place every single time. Not even features like a track editor and multiple race options can save this mess. Acclaim knew this steaming pal was busted and released it at a discount price, which should have been everyone's first clue that something was seriously wrong. Like a lot of these terrible releases, this one was ported from weaker hardware, this time the Nintendo 64. But at least there you had aging hardware to blame things on. On the Dreamcast, there was more than enough power to at least make the game look pretty and run well. You don't even get that much. The Dreamcast was strangled with half-ass ports like this, and it was a problem its entire life. But when Acclaim was involved, you were almost always guaranteed a loser, and Supercross 2000 is yet another black eye on a legacy marred by terrible multi-platform efforts. I wanted to like 1992's Batman Returns for the Atari Lynx. In some ways, I think my inner 16-year-old self still tries to like it to this very day. But in the end, it's just not a very good game. The repetition of enemies never lets up, resulting in a 30-minute ride of punching bad guys in the nuts. The stage design is little more than walking right and never really adds any meaningful platforming or vertical movement beyond jumping over things. Despite having some nice colorful visuals, the sound here is particularly bad. I mean the kind of bad that you want to turn the volume way down. With just 4 stages, the developers made it a bit difficult, and I'm willing to bet most of you have never seen it past the first stage or 2. Thing is, it's not really good enough to keep you playing to see more. It had potential, but this needed a lot more time in the oven and some variety away from the non-stop enemies. The Lynx was starving for game titles during its life, but not even that can save this one. Play it for the experience, but I seriously doubt many of you will stay to the end. Being such a big fan of Batman on the Genesis, you can bet I was excited to play 1992's Batman Revenge of the Joker. Little did I know that Sunsoft had farmed this one out to a developer that had never done a game like this before. And it really shows in every facet of this release. The visuals are strange, the sound is a joke, and the gameplay is frustrating. You start getting hit from the moment you start moving, and it's the kind of stuff that's exhausting to defend against. Things falling on your head, blending in with the backgrounds, and moving far faster than you is the order of the day. Everything about it just fights you tooth and nail to keep you away from having any fun at all. You have a number of weapons, but they lack effectiveness in the oddest of ways. Some enemies just don't seem to be bothered by anything but your standard attack. You can eventually get good enough to enjoy it, but most will be turned away and not bothered due to the constant and unrelenting stage and enemy design. To see the Sunsoft name fall so heinously in just a year's time was really depressing, even more so since I enjoyed the NES release of this one far more. A port of that would have been far more preferable.
Sega and Digital Pictures put a lot of effort into trying to sell you software for the Sega CD that weren't actually games. A series of releases known as the Make My Video line featured some popular artists at the time. These had you taking pre-recorded clips and making your own video montage for the song included. Aside from the interactive aspect of putting the clips where you wanted, there were no games here at all. They were among the lowest rated titles you could find at the time, and really gave the Sega CD a bad name. Not all full motion video games were terrible, but stuff like this definitely didn't help their reputation.
Hello? Hey! Is anybody out there?
Excuse me? Are you awake? You didn't do anything.
Hello? Alright, look. We're gonna give you one more chance. Don't blow it.
Among the launch titles for the Sega CD, you'd be hard-pressed to find something worse than Black Hole Assault from Micronet, the sequel to the much-hated Genesis game Heavy Nova. This is a one-on-one fighter that pits robots against one another across 8 stages. It does have some voice-acted cutscenes and the music isn't terrible, but man is the gameplay rough. The special moves have a gauge that limits their use. You get knocked down with damn near every move, and it only has one punch and one kick button, greatly limiting its moveset. It's the kind of repetitive slog that marred most early fighting games, and one of the reasons why the smoothness in games like Street Fighter II was so appreciated. It's a rough reminder of how far fighting games have come.
So there we go, a bunch of games you need not waste any time on. It isn't often you'll hear me say a video game is completely worthless. I mean, even the most contentious experience has some kind of merit, but I really did feel this batch were games you can forget about. Retro gaming is far too awesome to waste any time on the likes of these travesties. If you like the idea behind this video and would like to see more, let me know down in the comments and I'll see what I can do. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.